Q Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland Podcast, recorded at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @symbol CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com. That is INFORMATION @symbol CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
From the Herald, Wednesday, 3rd July 2024. News section. Scottish shipbuilding revival could boost economy by £342 million a year. Exclusive by Brian Donnelly, business correspondent. Shipbuilding in Scotland is set to contribute more to the economy as the industry grows, backed by increased spending. Analysis from finance firm Rift has shown that despite the steep decline from the glory days of the 1900s, Scotland's shipbuilding industry has remained steadily consistent in recent years. However, it said a push to rebuild the sector could bring a potential boost of £342 million to the Scottish economy, while more recently it has been bolstered by an increase in defence investment. In the early 1900s, it is thought that a fifth of the world's ships were built on the River Clyde in Glasgow, with 70,000 in the city alone. But following high demand during both the First and Second World Wars, the industry has since declined rapidly due to competition from other nations such as China, Japan and Korea. Analysis of the latest government figures by Rift shows that in 2021, the Scottish shipbuilding sector employed just 6,700 workers, accounting for just 0.36% of total Scottish employment figures, with an estimated 6 ships built over the course of a year, all of which were either workboats or fishing vessels. This employment figure sits 12% below the highest peak of the last decade, when 7,600 workers were employed in 2017. However, it has been steadily climbing in recent years. Between 2017 and 2019, the number of workers within the sector fell from 7,600 to 6,200, the lowest number seen over the last decade. Since then, this number has climbed steadily to the 6,700 recorded in 2021, and with Scottish shipbuilding remaining a £1 billion sector, turning over £1.022 billion last year. Almost £400 million went towards boosting the Scottish economy in 2021. Rift's analysis shows that over the last decade, the total turnover per employee within the Scottish shipbuilding sector has averaged £180,000, 119, while the average gross value added per employee sits at £55,309 over the last 10 years. Rift has also projected if the employment numbers were doubled from the 6,700 seen in 2021 to 13,400, this would push the total turnover of the Scottish shipbuilding industry to £2.414 billion, with gross value added to the Scottish economy via the sector increasing to £741 million per year, a boost of £342 million versus the annual total GVA seen in 2021. While difficulties at the Scottish Government-owned Ferguson Marine have been documented, hundreds of jobs are being created by BAE Systems as it expands its operations in Glasgow, and shipbuilding has been high on the agenda in the months leading up to the general election. Bradley Post, Managing Director of Rift, said, "Scotland is a fiercely proud nation, and this is certainly no different when it comes to the nation's proud history of shipbuilding, as demonstrated by the fight to keep the sector alive by the workers, in particular in recent history. While the industry today remains a far cry from its glory days of the 1900s, it has at least benefited from calmer waters in recent years, with employment figures remaining fairly consistent and the sector still turning over £1 billion per year." That was an exclusive by Brian Donnelly. From the Herald, Wednesday, 3rd July 2024. News section. SNP overtake Labour in the day before the election. By Jodie Harrison, reporter. Labour has slipped behind the SNP days before election day, a new poll suggests. A survey by Savanta for the Scotsman suggests 31% of Scots could vote Labour on Thursday, 3 points down on the last poll, while support for the SNP is unchanged at 34%. According to analysis from Professor Sir John Curtis, Labour, which won just one seat north of the border in the 2019 election, is on course for 22 Scottish MPs, while the SNP would keep 24 seats. The poll carried out between June the 28th and July the 2nd suggests the Conservatives are on 15%, up 1 point, while the Liberal Democrats are at 9%, up 2 points on the last poll earlier in June. The latest poll of 1,083 Scottish adults found 6% said they would back Reform UK, no change since the last poll, while the Greens were up 1 point to 3% and 2% said they would vote for other parties. Chris Hopkins, Political Research Director at Savanta, said, "Our final Scottish voting intention before the 4th of July suggests the SNP is ahead of Labour, showing a modest improvement and potentially blunting their losses on election night. If our results were reflected on polling day, John Swinney's election as SNP leader looks like it will have come just in the nick of time. That being said, Labour's efficient vote, in particular around the Central Belt, will still mean it's likely to be a very good evening for Anna Sawar and Keir Starmer. The majority is no longer dependent on Scotland, but they'll want to squeeze the SNP as much as they can." Savanta's poll also suggests the SNP, unchanged at 37%, is ahead of Labour in the Holyrood constituency voting intention, with the latter at 32%, down 3 points on the last poll. The poll puts the Conservatives on 16%, up 2 points, while the Liberal Democrats are on 9%, up 1 point, with 6% saying they would vote for others, up 1 point. The Holyrood list vote was much closer, with the SNP on 29%, down 2 points, Labour on 28%, down 1 point, and the Conservatives on 16%, also down 1 point. The Greens were on 11%, up 2 points, the Lib Dems on 11%, also up 2 points, and support for other was at 5%, up 1 point. Analysis by Professor Curtis suggests that if the results were reflected at election time, the SNP would remain the largest party in Holyrood with 46 MSPs. The Labour Party would be a close second with 37 MSPs, and the Conservatives would be reduced to 21. That article was by Jodie Harrison, reporter.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday, the 3rd of July, 2024, from the Voices section. Part-time Prime Minister jibe backfires on Tories. This article is by Alison Rowett. Whatever the comings and goings on Friday, no politician will depart the stage to the cheers heading Andy Murray's way when he retires. Though we knew it was coming, hearing he has played his last Wimbledon singles was a dunt to the spirit. Not for Sir Andy and the other sporting greats a set working week, guaranteed progression in their careers and a fixed date for retirement. Champions soar as high as they can for as long as they can, and when they cannot, it is over. Away from Wimbledon, in another London postcode, Working Ways came up in an interview with Sir Keir Starmer. Speaking on Virgin Radio, the man hoping to be the UK's next Prime Minister served notice that he won't be working Fridays after 6 p.m. Some people think if you fill your diary 24/7 and don't do anything else, that makes you a much better decision maker. "I don't agree," he told Chris Evans, himself no stranger to setting his own hours. Cue outrage from the Conservatives, who branded Sir Keir a part-time Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak said he had never finished at 6 p.m, though given his record, it is hard to see that as anything to boast about. Grant Shapps, former Defence Secretary, wondered who would be standing in for Starmer between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. Angela Rayner? David Lammy? Ed Miliband? They were ridiculous comments, particularly from Shapps, who once again enlisted our servicemen and women on his side. His intervention called to mind Hillary Clinton's melodramatic and much lampooned ad of 2008, the one with the sleeping children and the 3 a.m. phone call. Who could America rely on to pick up the phone in the event of an international crisis? Barack Obama, apparently. The manufactured row over Keir Starmer's 6 p.m. finish did prove useful in throwing light on one of the most pressing subjects of our times: work. Who should work and how? What rights should workers have? How much should they earn? What changes will AI bring? When should we stop work? The latter question continues to consume Democrats following Joe Biden's woeful performance against Donald Trump in the first televised US presidential debate last week. The only surprise was that anyone should be shocked. Party chiefs have been warned for years, and the voters have said it in poll after poll, that they were concerned about Biden's age and ability to do the job. If he was the CEO of any business, he would have been taken aside long before now and told it was time to go. Yet he is determined to carry on, and he probably will, largely because the party has left it too late to replace him. In the UK, working smarter has been at the heart of this general election campaign. The main parties agree that growing the economy is the only way the state will be able to pay for the services people need without increasing taxes or cutting spending. Going for growth means boosting productivity. But how? Many countries are looking at the 4-day working week as the answer. Greece, however, is going the other way and bringing in a 6-day week. According to Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, this will make up for a shortage of skilled staff and the growing number of young Greeks seeking work abroad. Trade unions are outraged, arguing the move is more about boosting profits than productivity. In the UK, Labour's plan to boost workers' rights has been one of the trickiest policies for the party to sell during this campaign. Brought in at the insistence of the unions, there was a wobble early on with pro-business factions in the party suggesting a go-easy, graduated approach would be better than any big bang reform. The same arguments will be repeated, this time with business involved directly, should Labour win on Thursday. Any perceived backtracking will be met with fury from the unions, though how much that matters depends on the size of any Labour majority. The union money has already been spent getting Labour into government. What happens next depends on ministers. Many are banking on Angela Rayner, Labour deputy leader and potentially deputy prime minister, to deliver on a policy she has personally championed. An incoming Labour government might also find its plan to cut NHS waiting times by offering weekend and evening appointments is more difficult than it appears. NHS doctors and nurses will be paid overtime to take on extra shifts. But how many will want to? There is already a problem with staff burnout. Given the enormity of the tasks ahead, Keir Starmer snapping the lid on his highlighter pen at 6 p.m. on a Friday seems neither here nor there. As he has said in interviews, and as those Conservatives criticising him this week must have known, the Starmer family keep Shabbat or Friday night dinner, and have done for years. For many families and friends, Jewish or not, Friday nights are a chance to unite and relax after the stresses of the week. Such occasions are a good thing, something to be celebrated, and not made the basis of a cheap jibe about a part-time Prime Minister. There ought to be an apology from the Conservatives, but don't count on it. The brilliant Friday night dinner, by the way, is Sir Keir's favourite sitcom. Catch it on Channel 4 or Netflix if you have not yet had the pleasure. From Prime Ministers and teachers to surgeons and, dare one say it, journalists, everyone needs time off to rest and renew. Presenteeism, being at work come what may, does no one any good and actively does many harm. Problems arise when people are denied proper time off, either because they have to do several jobs to make ends meet, or their services are in such demand because of shortages. Remember, too, the shift workers, without which no country could function or prosper. Early shift, late shift, happy in your work or looking for another job, we all deserve a break. Yes, even those who work at Conservative campaign headquarters. That article was by Alison Rowett. This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday the 3rd of July 2024 from the business section. Glasgow's Sistal signs major tech deal with Coca-Cola. This article is by Christy Dorsey. Network solutions provider Sistal has unveiled a major multi-year upgrade to its partnership with Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific Partners, that's CCEP, the company responsible for bottling on behalf of the world's biggest soft drink company in Western Europe. Glasgow-based Sistal will provide managed network support to more than 6,500 devices, such as switches and routers, responsible for production and warehousing activities. This network is spread across 300 locations in 11 European countries. The 3-year deal follows 6 years of Sistal providing support to CCEP via a multi-partner agreement. CCEP will now rank among the Scottish company's largest direct customers, along with the likes of Scottish Power. Neil Wisby, Chief Information Officer at Sistal, said the new agreement is probably double the size of the scope of services previously provided to CCEP. Sistal also provides voice, maintenance and project services to CCEP, which is looking to transform its network via a new manufacturing system, supply chain rationalization and product diversification. We are thrilled to officially go live with our direct service as CCEP's trusted technology services partner, Mr. Wisby said. Our team's agility and dedication to providing a higher value service delivery has been the bedrock of our CCEP partnership over the past 6 years. We are excited to continue supporting CCEP as they innovate and transform their critical network infrastructure. Set up in 2008, the company has grown from just 80 employees in 2018 to more than 1,000 people. latest published accounts for 2022 show revenues of £74.8 million, with year-on-year turnover increasing by 77%. About 200 of its staff work out of its headquarters in Bishopbriggs, with the rest spread across 35 countries in Europe, Asia, North America and the Pacific regions. The business is majority owned by its founders, Chief Executive Neil Nicholson, Chief Revenue Officer Douglas Cumming, and Chief Operating Officer Gary O'Neill. Now a board member and minority shareholder, Mr. Wisby was among the first people hired by Sistal when he joined from IBM 15 years ago. "We are the best kept secret in Scotland," Mr. Wisby said when asked about the company's relatively low profile. "It is amazing when you think about how we have grown from where we were originally in Livingston to where we are now. It's incredible, really." The company has further ambitious plans following the opening earlier this year of its US headquarters in Florida, where there are huge opportunities for growth. For its part, CCEP is aiming to become the world's most digitized bottler. It is also seeking to increase its range of products into new categories, such as coffee and alcohol, with network infrastructure at the core of its transformation strategy. "We are excited to partner with Sistal, a company known for its expertise in network infrastructure solutions," said Tim Davies, Director of Network Infrastructure and Services at CCEP. "This contract will significantly enhance our operational efficiency and allow us to better serve our customers and stakeholders." Formerly known as Coca-Cola European Partners, CCEP is a British-American company formed in 2016 through the combination of the three main bottling companies for the Coca-Cola Company in Western Europe. It has been listed on the London Stock Exchange since March 2019. That article was by Christy Dorsey. This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday the 3rd of July 2024 from the business section. Used EV and hybrid car prices, Toyota Prius and Tesla Model 3 drop. This article is by Ian McConnell. Prices of the UK's most popular used electric and hybrid vehicles plummeted by an average of 19% year-on-year in the second quarter of 2024, the latest AA Cars Used Car Index reveals. The price of a used Toyota Prius dropped by more than 50% between the second quarter of 2023 and the 3 months to June this year, while the average price of a second-hand Tesla Model 3 is down 35% in 12 months, according to the research. All of the top 20 electric vehicles and hybrids listed for sale on AA Cars have fallen in price over the past year, and on average they become 12% cheaper in the past quarter alone. In stark contrast, the most in-demand used petrol and diesel cars on AA Cars have increased in price by 3.5% between the first and second quarter of 2024, with the Audi A5 seeing the biggest rise of 33%. James Hosking, director of AA Cars, said, "Demand for second-hand EVs and hybrid vehicles continues to rise, but prices are coming down thanks to a surge in supply. Buyers are seeing lower average prices as corporate leases begin to expire and thousands of former fleet EVs come on to the second-hand market for the first time, providing greater choice and more attractive prices for buyers." The Toyota Yaris, which is the most sought-after car on the EV and hybrid list, has fallen in price by 14% over the past 12 months, while the Toyota Prius, which is the second most popular, has dropped by 52% over the same period, AA Cars said. It added, every one of the top 20 used electric or hybrid used cars on the AA platform fell in price between Q2 of 2023 and Q2 of 2024, as the market saw a surge in the number of second-hand models coming up for sale. In contrast, the average price of the 20 most popular used petrol and diesel cars on the platform has increased in the 3 months to June. Prices rose by 3.5% in the 3 months to June compared with the previous quarter, reversing 2 consecutive quarters of falling prices. Mr. Hosking said, the overall downward pressure on pricing is likely to continue, but reductions vary considerably between different makes and models. Prices of the most popular petrol and diesel used cars have rebounded after falling for 2 consecutive quarters, although in most cases the increases are relatively modest. Buyers will find that prices for a lot of used cars are still considerably lower than they were this time last year, and that there are plenty of good deals out there. If you are planning to change up your vehicle, you might be pleasantly surprised by the prices of good second-hand models. But before you start car shopping in earnest, start online by getting a sense of what other buyers are paying for similar makes and models of the same age and comparable mileage. That article was by Ian McConnell.
This is from the Herald Scotland on Thursday the 4th of July, from the news section. Calmac ferry forced to make a U-turn to allow cruise ship to dock. This article is written by Craig Williams. Debate has sparked online after Calmac's largest ferry was forced to perform a U-turn to allow a cruise ship to dock. The incident took place at the entrance to Stornoway Harbour on Monday of last week. It involved the MV Loch Seaforth, which serves the Stornoway to Ullapool route, and the 291-metre-long MZ Zuiderdam cruise ship, which is owned and operated by Holland America Line. News of the incident was shared by an islander in a Facebook post, who argued that the ferry should have had priority over the cruise liner, which was docking in Arnish, given that the ferry runs to a tight schedule. The argument was reinforced by a worker at Scrabster Harbour, who contributed to the debate by saying that the MV Hamnavo, which sails between Scrabster and Stromness in Orkney, always has right of passage. The ferry timetable cannot be interrupted. Another questioned why regularly scheduled vital public transportation needs to move aside for rich people on an enormous polluting ship. In contrast, a third contested that, as a basic point of seamanship, a smaller vessel has no right of way in a channel out of which a bigger ship cannot safely manoeuvre, while a fourth suggested that law of gross tonnage always wins. Meanwhile, another contributor to the debate suggested that it is also plausible that the master of the Loch Seaforth had been given permission to berth, but if the cruise ship was using thrusters to dock, decided to go around if there was too much wash, given he's ultimately responsible for the safety of his vessel, crew and passengers. Calmac confirmed to the Herald that the MV Loch Seaforth was delayed in docking in Stornoway due to the late arrival of the MS Zuiderdam. A Calmac spokesperson said, "We can confirm MV Loch Seaforth had a short delay in docking on Monday the 24th of June, after being instructed by the harbour owner to allow a late-running cruise liner to berth first. Despite the delay, the next scheduled sailing was able to depart on time, and the service continued to operate to timetable. It comes weeks after photos showing a monster cruise ship visiting St Kilda sparked outcry after appearing online. Images of a cruise ship docked off Herta were shared on X, formerly known as Twitter, leading some to question the frequency of such visits, while others expressed concern over how such visits help the climate issues on the archipelago, which is situated around 40 miles west-northwest of North Uist in the North Atlantic Ocean. Responding to concerns raised on X, NTS said it believes that the visit by the cruise ship was unscheduled. They wrote, "This was drawn to our attention by St Kilda's head ranger, Sue Loughran. We work with the cruise ship industry to encourage responsible tourism, and we limit the number of vessels calling into St Kilda. We also limit the number of passengers who come ashore. The companies we work with agree to our biosecurity procedures and wildlife watching codes. However, on this occasion, we believe this vessel was sailing past the island en route to another destination. It did not land passengers and was not scheduled to visit. We will speak to the company about your concerns and appreciate you flagging this to us." The cruise ship in question was the Spirit of Adventure, a 58,000-ton cruise ship operated by Saga Cruises, which departed from Dover on May the 9th on a scheduled 14-day West Coast Explorer from Orkney to Ireland sailing. The itinerary listed on the Saga Cruises made no mention of a stopover at St Kilda. A Saga spokesperson said, "The Spirit of Adventure passed through the Bay of St Kilda on its planned sailing around the Hebrides. Prior to approaching the area, the ship made the relevant local authorities aware of the scenic sail past. Given that it is a sensitive area for wildlife, and having worked previously in the region, along with the National Trust for Scotland, the captain took all the appropriate procedures to avoid disruption and any adverse impact." That article was written by Craig Williams. This is from the Herald Scotland on Thursday the 4th of July, from the news section. Police Scotland arrest 12 after Gaza demo in Glasgow. This article is written by Gabriel Mackay. Police Scotland have been accused of a completely disproportionate response to a protest at a factory in Glasgow, with demonstrators alleging they were pepper sprayed and beaten as 12 people were charged. On Wednesday morning, a group of around 100 people blockaded the entrance to the Thales plant in Govan, in protest over the company's ties to Israeli defence contractor Elbit Systems. Elbit produces 85% of drones used by the Israel Defence Forces, as well as the same proportion of the country's land-based equipment. Thales said it had an SME joint venture with Elbit to produce drones, and that it supplies the UK Ministry of Defence and does not supply the Israeli military or Israeli MOD. The company, UAV Tactical Systems, is 51% owned by Elbit and produces the Watchkeeper WK-450 drone for the British Armed Forces, which is based on the Elbit Hermes 450. Following a previous protest at the factory in May, Police Scotland were accused of heavy-handed tactics towards protesters and intimidating behaviour towards members of the media. Following Wednesday's demonstrations, there were 12 arrests, with those present again criticising the actions of law enforcement. A spokesperson for the group told the Herald, "The police's actions today were completely disproportionate response and a huge overreach of their powers. Arresting 142 members of the public as a consequence of a mass protest against Thales' complicity in Israeli war crimes is an inappropriate and unnecessary escalation that does nothing for public safety. These actions raise the question of whose interests Police Scotland are trying to protect, ordinary people or just the profits of businesses. Many protesters were beaten by batons, others were pepper sprayed, and at least 2 people ending up in hospital. This is not a proportionate response to our actions. Time and time again the police show that they do not keep us safe. Right now, Thales is actively profiting from bombs raining down on Gaza in violation of international law. Yet, the police are more concerned with protecting Tharlee's ability to operate than with ensuring the safety of the Scottish public or the peace and safety of the people currently in Gaza. A police spokesperson said, following a demonstration in the Govan area of Glasgow, 12 people have been charged. Around 4:55 a.m. on Wednesday, police were called to a report of a protest at a business premises on Lindhouse Road. 2 men were arrested in connection with disorder offences. A third man was arrested on warrant. Around 11:40 a.m, the officers were called to a subsequent disturbance on Govan Road. A further 9 people were arrested in connection with disorder offences. They are due to appear at Glasgow Sheriff Court at a later date, and reports for each will be sent to the Procurator Fiscal. Asked by the Herald about the allegations made by the protesters, Police Scotland did not respond. This story will be updated with any further comment. A Thales spokesperson said, Thales adheres to the UK government's industry control system for overseas sales, one of the most rigorous and transparent of its kind in the world. In the UK, we have an SME JV with Israeli company Elbit called U-Tax. This is a UK-registered company that supplies systems to the UK MOD. It does not supply the Israeli military or Israeli MOD. As we have said previously, while those outside our site in Glasgow have the right to protest peacefully, we will work with the authorities to prosecute anyone who threatens our employees, our property, or our important work for the UK Armed Forces. That article was written by Gabriel Mackay. This is from the Herald Scotland on Thursday the 4th of July, from the news section. Student nurse hailed as a hero as quick thinking helps save man's life. This article is written by Mark McDougall. A nursing student has been hailed as a hero after saving an elderly man's life while returning from holiday. Sarah Randall was at Ayr train station with her boyfriend after a trip to Belfast and saw a man in pain on another platform and went to check on him. When the 22-year-old got to him, she discovered he had fallen and suffered a severe open fracture that saw 2 leg bones protruding through the skin and causing significant blood loss. The student nurse from Barhead made a makeshift tourniquet and bandage out of a dress in her bag and used it to control the bleeding and stabilise the injury. She had only learned the techniques a matter of weeks before while studying at the University of the West of Scotland. She also assisted paramedics when they arrived and helped them realign the patient's leg, apply a pressure bandage and safely move him on a trolley to transport him to hospital. The Dean of UWS School of Health and Life Sciences praised her for her heroism, but she insisted she was just doing what anyone else would. The second-year student said, "I did what I hope any nurse in training would do in that situation. I was just in the right place at the right time, and I'm just glad I could help and that the gentleman is receiving the care he needs. This experience has definitely reinforced my passion for nursing and my desire to make a positive impact in people's lives." Andrew Girvan from the Scottish Ambulance Service, who was sent to the scene, said, "Sarah's actions at the scene were above and beyond what is expected of a student. Her quick thinking and medical knowledge undoubtedly contributed to saving this man's life. I am deeply grateful for her assistance and confident that she will make an outstanding nurse." That article was written by Mark McDougall.
The Herald, Monday the 8th of July, from the news section. Nicola, look no further for the culprit behind the party's demise. For those of us pulling an 8-hour shift at the P&J Conference Arena at the Aberdeen election count, the task of keeping ourselves occupied could have been challenging. On Thursday night, however, we looked forward to the wise epithets of Nicola Sturgeon on ITV to keep us occupied. It turned out to be a false hope. According to some of my broadcast colleagues, the former First Minister of Scotland was being paid £10,000 for election night punditry. In the last 48 hours, several senior SNP people have spoken of the need to reflect on their electoral losses. Perhaps ITV bosses will now be reflecting on their decision to hire Miss Sturgeon. Her only contributions of note grew more unhinged as the evening progressed. She began by being nasty about Peter Smith, one of the few Scottish broadcast journalists who ask the sitting government the questions that viewers are asking. Mr. Smith had rather expertly and eloquently nailed the lie that the SNP losses were mainly due to an overall desire to kick out the Tories. Scottish voters aren't stupid and don't like being dismissed as the ignorant bigots that the Scottish Government and the Greens are so fond of portraying them as. They turned on the SNP for no other reason than they didn't like what they were being told by the party and for many manifest failures in office. Miss Sturgeon also said that it was a mistake to chuck the Scottish Greens out of government. If this is what amounts to her analysis, you can only wonder how she ever made it in politics. The decision to embrace the Greens and their creepy agendas was one of the main reasons cited on doorsteps across Scotland when I joined some candidates on the stump. Literally no one had anything positive to say about this psycho party. Miss Sturgeon also cited what she regarded as the failure of her party to link the cause of independence to people's everyday lives. In this, she was entirely accurate. It's just that the main culprit in this failure was one Nicola Sturgeon. Under her influence, the SNP loathed everyday people and their everyday lives. Misogyny madness. Laughably, some of Miss Sturgeon's media glove puppets have since been seeking to defend her in the face of criticism for her role in the SNP's apocalypse. According to them, criticism of her was rooted in misogyny. It seemed not to matter that for almost a decade she was the most powerful person in Scotland and had influence in the affairs of the nation that extended well beyond mere politics. Far from being a victim of misogyny, Miss Sturgeon was the chief enabler by which misogynist males were able to flourish inside the SNP. Many of them found a home within the party's Westminster group and were gloriously and pleasingly defenestrated on Thursday night. It became known throughout civic Scotland during her reign that if you wanted to have a rewarding career in the public sector, you had to sign up completely to her identity and cultural policy agenda. Put simply, if you were a woman who believes that trans women are men, then you could never have a career in Scottish public life. No one did more damage to real women's rights in Scotland than Nicola Sturgeon. No gender-critical woman could ever feel entirely safe or valued in her Scotland. Male lickspittles. Another characteristic of Miss Sturgeon's reign was an implacable hounding and harrying of gifted women who dared to disagree with her. Much of this was carried out by male lickspittles, like the party's former Westminster leader Ian Blackford, and a gangrenous cabal of nationalist MPs who formed around him. They were united by several common traits, including possessing no discernible talent to justify their status as MPs, and a desire to marginalise talented women. One of the main victims of their campaign was Joanna Cherry, the most able Westminster MP the party possessed. Miss Cherry was highly regarded across all parties at Westminster and gained respect for her expert role in embarrassing Boris Johnson when he tried to prorogue Parliament. Her own party had the opportunity to own this process, but such were the levels of jealousy surrounding her that the SNP would rather stay silent about Mr Johnson's perfidy than to be seen to support Miss Cherry. They were also fearful of attempting to do anything that might incur the wrath of Nicola Sturgeon, and being seen to stand with Joanna Cherry most definitely would have. Voter backlash. Joanna Cherry was one of a few good SNP MPs who succumbed on Thursday night to the inevitable backlash by voters against the party's unhinged culture wars. Some Sturgeon apologists sought to portray Miss Cherry's demise as proof that there wasn't really a backlash over the gender cult. This, of course, is nonsense. Beyond the trans debate, there were literally dozens of reasons to ditch the SNP and anyone associated with them. The Scottish Government had failed in everything it touches, and this was evident on dozens of doorsteps that I called on. Indeed, while observing Miss Cherry on the doorsteps of Curry in southwest Edinburgh last month, it was clear that while some voters held her personally in high regard, they also wanted to teach the SNP a lesson. For those of us who still support an independent Scotland, it is to be hoped that the party will heed that lesson. Yet, I have my doubts. It is clear that some of the most wretched of the careerists and mountebanks who lost their seats on Thursday will attempt to insinuate themselves onto the party lists for the 2026 Scottish election. Under no circumstances must this be allowed to happen. If voters see the names of these flatulent clowns on the lists, then they'll perform another retreat from SNP. That was an article by Kevin McKenna. The Herald, Monday the 8th of July, from the news section. Titan of Scottish education world dies. Tributes have been paid from the worlds of learning, business and the wider public sector to Frank Pignatelli, a titan of education, who has died aged 77 after a short illness. Professor Pignatelli was born in Anderston, Glasgow. His first job after school was as a bus conductor, but he went to evening classes to secure the qualifications for university entrance. After qualifying as a teacher, he taught French, Italian and religious education at St Mungo's Academy, Glasgow. He became an education officer and rose to the role of Director of Education at Strathclyde Region, the biggest local education authority in Europe. Several senior roles in the private and public sectors followed before he retired in 2007. More than 10,000 unique views and comments have appeared on LinkedIn after the announcement of his death was posted on the social media platform by Angela, Mr. Pignatelli's daughter. Barry Docherty, positive psychology coach at Character Matters, wrote, "I've known Frank since the age of 5 at St Pat's in Anderston. He was a gentle human being, highly creative and always curious, especially about things that matter most like love, fairness, equality, and always in the corner advocating on behalf of the underdog." Ross Martin, advisor on regional economies, described Mr. Pignatelli as an educational titan whose impact was immeasurable. Donnie Munro, Director of Development Funding at the College on Skye and former lead singer with Runrig, posted, "Frank was a brilliant, caring and kind man, and I was very honoured and privileged to have known him." Jean Carwood-Edwards, professional advisor at the Scottish Government, responded, "What an incredibly influential, inspirational, highly respected gentleman." Yvonne Brown, an independent educationalist, said, "She was fortunate to have been an apprentice to Mr. Pignatelli at Learn Direct, the leading online course provider. He was so gifted in so many areas and always willing to share his knowledge and enthusiasm for learning and learners," she commented. Ian Mackay, a former senior figure in the Educational Institute of Scotland Teachers Union and a non-executive director at the Security Industry Authority regulator, posted, "Frank was a major player in Scottish education for many years, and his team went on to make a big impact after local government reorganisation and Strathclyde was broken up. In a world where every decision was hard and so many people were in need, Frank passed the only test that mattered. He was on the side of progress and trying to make things better for ordinary people, a life well lived." After Strathclyde Region was abolished by the Conservative government in 1996, Mr. Pignatelli decided the time was right to move on from local government. He moved into the private sector when he became Group Director of Human Resources and Main Board Director at Associated Newspapers in London. Having left that position, he took consultancy roles in the higher education sector and in the Scottish Parliament. He was also a director of the Company Direction Programme in Scotland with Institute of Directors. In addition, he was education advisor to the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, the South African government post-apartheid, the Egyptian government, and a number of bodies in the Australian state of Queensland. Mr. Pignatelli was a pro bono advisor and mentor to individuals and charitable, voluntary and not-for-profit organisations, and a pro bono mediator in the family, community and interpersonal and special educational needs arenas. He also found the time to write 2 modern language textbooks. He retired in 2006, and the following year he and his wife Rosetta moved to Apremont in France, where the couple spent 11 happy years. True to form, he continued to mentor and help people with their development and in their careers. He was made a CBE for his services to education. One honour he was immensely proud of that was conferred upon him was issued by the Holt Bar in Woodlands Road, Glasgow, Deputy Sheriff of Colton Creek, 1992. Mr. Pignatelli is survived by Rosetta, son Paul, daughter Angela and their families. The funeral will take place on Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. at Dalnotter Crematorium in Clydebank. Thereafter there will be a celebration of his life in the Mackintosh Suite House for an art lover from 3:30 p.m. An obituary will be published later. That was an exclusive article by Barclay McBain. The Herald, Monday the 8th of July from the news section. Too close to Sturgeon. John Swinney faces calls to resign. Alex Neil has called for a new SNP leader to be unveiled next month before Holyrood returns after the summer recess, as he called for John Swinney to resign. The former SNP Health Secretary said Mr. Swinney's position was not tenable because of the devastating election result on Thursday and also because of his closeness to Nicola Sturgeon. Her 8.5-year tenure as SNP leader and First Minister is now being blamed by some as a reason for the humiliating defeat. He warned if Mr. Swinney continued as leader, the party would suffer another rout at the Scottish Parliament election in May 2026. The SNP experienced a huge blow at the general election last Thursday, losing 39 seats, down from 48 the party won in 2019, which left it with just 9 MPs. It lost all the seats it held in Glasgow and Edinburgh, with a resurgent Labour Party ousting SNP MPs right across the central belt to take 37 seats, up from 1 in 2019. Prominent casualties of the night to Labour include Joanna Cherry in Edinburgh South West, Tommy Shepherd in Edinburgh East, and Alison Thewlis, the former Glasgow Central MP, who was standing as the party's candidate in Glasgow North following boundary changes. The devastating election blow has triggered recriminations among senior figures in the party about who is responsible for the losses. Miss Cherry has pointed the finger at Miss Sturgeon and former Westminster leader Ian Blackford, while Miss Sturgeon blamed Mr. Swinney's campaign. In turn, Mr. Blackford dismissed Miss Cherry as bitter, an accusation she rejected. Further recriminations were made by Tony Giuliani, the SNP's defeated candidate in Falkirk, who last week partly blamed Mr. Swinney's support for ex-Health Secretary Michael Matheson for his election defeat. Mr. Giuliani said Mr. Matheson should not have been protected by the leadership after he wrongly claimed £11,000 iPad expenses while on holiday in Morocco on the public purse. Speaking to the Herald, Mr. Neil said Mr. Swinney would have to go and the party should hold a leadership contest with a view to his successor being in place at the end of August. He accused the party of not having a clear message on the Constitution and of pursuing policies on gender self-identification, which polling suggested has not been popular with voters, and for being responsible for a poor record on public service delivery while in government. The leadership of the SNP has totally lost touch with both the grassroots of the party and the people, he said. The campaign we ran was complete rubbish. There was a total lack of a clear message coming across. 1 minute talking about independence, the next about Devo Max. There was nothing exciting to say about policy, just slogans. There was a total lack of preparation for a campaign, despite knowing for some time there was going to be a general election this year. And of course, we are paying a heavy price for the Sturgeon mistakes, for the mistakes by her, by Humza Yousaf and John Swinney on gender, and the mess they have allowed the NHS and education to get into. Mr. Neil said the first thing needed to turn around the party's fortunes was fresh leadership, with people taking over who are not associated with the Sturgeon-Swinney years of failure. He added, the only two people who we have there are Kate Forbes and Stephen Flynn. My view is that Swinney should hand over to that new generation. John has led the party into 3 national elections, 2 when he was leader, before the Scottish Parliament election in 2003, and before the European election in 2004, and now this one. And in all 3, the party has gone substantially backwards. His natural skills are not in leading successful campaigns. This has been a disaster, and if they don't recognise it as such and take the necessary action, then we will face another disaster in 2 years. He is not a fresh leader. He is associated with Sturgeon years and the mistakes Sturgeon made. He was her chief cheerleader and implemented a lot of the daft policies that she tried to push through the Parliament and of the way the party and the government was run. John is seen as part of the Sturgeon problem, not the answer to it. He continued, I think the quicker the leadership hand over to the new generation of leaders, the better. Quite frankly, the current leadership is tarnished by the Sturgeon years. I think the party conference is still scheduled for the end of August. That would be the ideal time to do so and have a quick leadership election this summer. There will only be 20 months to the election. They have no time to spare. Kate Forbes and Stephen Flynn are the party's leading lights. They would be a great joint ticket. Asked if under them he thought the SNP could remain in power after May 2026, he said, the first thing is to stop another rout. When you get to the Holyrood election, not a large number of seats have to change hands between the pro- and anti-independence parties for us to be forced out of government. He said if there was an anti-independence majority, the first thing the pro-UK parties would do would be to oust the SNP. He said new policies were needed and the party needed to re-establish competence in government and to rewrite its independence strategy, which he said had no credibility. He called for a cabinet refresh and reforms to the health service, including an emergency land tax on large estates to raise funds for public services and improvements to education. Mr Neil is among prominent figures in the SNP to speak out in the wake of his party's polling day defeat. Speaking on Sunday, Miss Cherry said Miss Sturgeon owes SNP MPs who lost their seat an apology after voters became disillusioned by the party's independence strategy. The high-profile Miss Cherry, who has been among the loudest internal critics of her party's former leadership, told Sky News Monday morning with Trevor Phillips' programme that it had become difficult to persuade people to vote for the SNP. She said the party had failed to convince its core independent support of the way forward in the cause, while accusing the SNP-run Scottish Government of losing its competence and integrity. Speaking on the programme, she said, it was difficult to persuade people to vote SNP in this election. Many former constituents said to me on the doorstep, I would vote for you, Joanna, but I just can't vote SNP this time. Our core support, the people who believe passionately in the cause of Scottish independence, was very disillusioned at the party's failure to progress the cause of independence and failure to take advantage of some of the opportunities that were presented to us during the Brexit saga and also during the Boris Johnson premiership. On the other hand, there were a lot of people who voted for us in the past in Scotland who didn't necessarily support independence, but saw us as a strong and competent government at Holyrood, and also a party that governed with integrity. She added, "I am afraid to say, and ashamed for my party, that both our reputation of governing competently and for integrity has taken a severe battering in the last couple of years." And, while she said the defeat could not be solely blamed on Miss Sturgeon, she was asked whether the former First Minister owed the party an apology. She replied, "I think she does. I don't think you can ever blame a setback like this on one person. However, Nicola Sturgeon was a very strong leader who brooked no debate and no dissent, as I know to my considerable cost." Meanwhile, Mr Blackford gave rather lukewarm support to Mr Swinney, continuing as leader, saying there isn't really anybody else who could take on the job. The former SNP MP told the Sunday Mail the election results showed the electorate had delivered a very clear message, adding, "They're peed off." He said, "You can't sugarcoat any of this. It's up to John what the party does, but the electorate have delivered a very clear message to us. Primarily, they're peed off. I don't think anyone is pointing the finger at John and saying he has to go," he said. "He's inherited this and he has to own it in terms of fixing. It's not long until 2026. You've got some time and it can be turned around, but you need to demonstrate that you can be trusted." Asked by the publication if Mr Swinney would be able to turn the party's fortunes around, he said, "Time will tell, but there isn't really anybody else, so he's the man for it." Speaking on Friday, Mr Swinney said he took full responsibility for the campaign and was committed to healing the relationship between the SNP and the electorate, as he admitted his party had failed to convince the people of Scotland on independence. "The Scottish National Party needs to be healed, and it needs to heal its relationship with the people of Scotland, and I am absolutely committed to doing that," he said. The SNP was approached for comment. That was an exclusive article by Kathleen Nutt.
The Herald on the 9th of July and the news section. Migration in Scotland hits highest level in a decade, by Josh Carmichael. Migration has more than doubled in a year in Scotland, new figures show, hitting its highest level in a decade. The figures indicate Scotland is an attractive and welcoming place for migrants, the Equalities Minister said. Corcab Stewart welcomed the new National Records of Scotland NRS statistics, indicating migration in Scotland more than doubled between 2021 and 2022. In the year to June 2022, net migration into Scotland was 48,800, compared with 22,200 the previous year. The NRS says this represents the highest level of net migration over the past decade. A total of 36,300 more people moved to Scotland from outside the UK than left during 2021 to 2022, compared with 13,300 the previous year. Net migration to Scotland from the rest of the UK also rose to 12,500 people in the year to June 2022, compared with 8,900 in the previous year. The NRS also published revised population estimates for Scotland for 2011 to 2021, with new figures showing that Scotland's population increased by 2.2% between mid-2011 and mid-2021. NRS Head of Population and Migration Statistics, Esther Ruff-Sedge, said today's report shows that net migration more than doubled between mid-2021 and mid-2022 due to an increase in international migration. This increase is likely to be the result of a substantial rise in the number of international students studying at universities in Scotland. International migration is highest into the big cities, particularly Glasgow and Edinburgh. She added more people move to Scotland each year from other parts of the UK than leave, averaging around 9,000 people per year over the last decade. This figure rose to 12,500 people in the most recent year. The report shows that more people from other parts of the UK moved to Edinburgh than any other place in Scotland. Equalities Minister Ms Stewart said today's statistics show that Scotland is an attractive and welcoming destination for skilled workers, students and graduates. Those who chose Scotland as their home to help build our economy, increase our productivity and contribute to their local communities. In many parts of Scotland, the population is failing, and it is clear that we need continued migration to support our economy and help our nation to prosper. These statistics also reflect the contribution that Scotland has made in offering a warm welcome to people fleeing war and persecution. She added, since Russia's illegal war against Ukraine, over 27,000 people sponsored by an individual in Scotland or the Scottish Government have arrived in the UK. Scotland has also continued to welcome refugees arriving through UK resettlement and relocation programmes, and I am proud of how Scotland has responded to humanitarian crises. And that was by Josh Carmichael. The Herald on the 9th of July and the news section. Visitor numbers surge in Stirling after the summer sessions by Josh Carmichael. The city of Stirling has been experiencing a huge boost in footfall after it hosted a series of concerts near the castle, council bosses have said. The city has just finished hosting the inaugural summer sessions over the last week of June and the first week of July, with big names in the music industry travelling to the historic area to play for crowds. Acts such as Shania Twain attracted more than 20,000 fans to her show, and Sir Tom Jones wowed audiences in the shadow of Stirling Castle at Stirling City Park, while Busted and James Arthur delighted crowds at Stirling's Albert Halls. Also included was Raising Scottish band and winners of the Scottish Album of the Year award, Young Fathers, who rounded off the lineup to celebrate Stirling's marking its 900th anniversary. Council bosses have said the events, which were spread over 6 days from Thursday 27 June to Tuesday 2nd July, boosted visitor footfall in the city more than 50%, as music lovers from across Scotland and the UK flocked to see the acts. Stirling Council leader, Councillor Chris Kane, said Stirling has a proven track record of successfully hosting major events and big crowds, and the summer sessions were another fabulous showcase for our city as it celebrates its 900th birthday, bringing a feel-good factor for the people who attended, as well as economic benefits. We welcome thousands of music fans from across the country, as well as local residents, and Stirling City Park has again shown as a superb venue tailor-made for large-scale events. Even Shania Twain described the backdrop for her concert as magical. Councillor Kane went on to add that the organisers of the events, DF Concerts, had great feedback on the location and support they received to make the event happen. DF Concerts previously organised Tea in the Park and are behind the Glasgow Festival Transmit, which hosts 150,000 people across 3 days at Glasgow Green. Chief Executive Officer Jeff Ellis has nothing but praise for the Stirling Summer Sessions. He said, "We are really happy with how the inaugural Stirling Summer Sessions went, hosting such a huge lineup, including the incredible Shania Twain, who played to over 20,000 enthusiastic fans after her memorable Legends slot at Glastonbury was truly a highlight for everyone involved and something very special for the area. The setting of Stirling City Park in the shadow of historic Stirling Castle provided the perfect backdrop for a great few days of live music. We were incredibly thankful to the fans who attended for their energy and passion, and also extend our gratitude to the people of Stirling and all our stakeholders for their unwavering support and dedication, which were instrumental in making this event a success." On the customer experience side of the summer sessions, Stirling's Business Improvement District organised a team of volunteers to help visitors navigate the city centre and created a What's On website. They also distributed leaflets that shared the special offers and events arranged by local businesses throughout the week of concerts. Director of Go Forth Stirling BID, Danielle McCrory Smith, said that increased footfall meant businesses in the area were thriving, and hosting events such as these creates countless economic benefits. She said that the summer sessions brought an incredible energy to Stirling, attracting a diverse crowd and significantly boosting city sector businesses. Our footfall data showed a remarkable 51.1% increase in visitors, and local businesses reported substantial sales growth. The vibrant atmosphere and community engagement during these events were truly heartening, demonstrating the positive impact such events can have on our city. This successful series underscores the value of investing in cultural activities that drive economic growth and enhance the quality of life in Stirling. This was a major investment for the city, and traders reported significant benefits, with many hospitality businesses experiencing their busiest days on record. And that was by Josh Carmichael.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Tuesday the 9th of July 2024, from the Voices section. In a strange world where managers are paid less than staff. This article is by Christy Dorsey. Last year, my son was offered the opportunity to become a line manager for a well-known fast food chain at a busy late-night outlet in Glasgow city centre, where he had worked part-time for the previous 2 years. The job would have involved handling a team of approximately 8 to 10 people and at least one overnight shift, finishing at 4 a.m. every couple of weeks. Though his long-term professional goals lie elsewhere, a successful stint in management is a definite bonus on the CV of an 18-year-old, as he was then. It also came with a decent pay bump to £9.50 per hour, £2 more than he had been earning on the statutory minimum for someone of his age at that time. But there was an upshot. Because of the variations in the UK minimum wage between those under the age of 18, those aged 18 to 20, and those who are older, my son would have been earning 68 pence to 92 pence per hour less than anyone aged 21 or older who was under his management. Though a relatively small sum on an hourly basis, it racks up over the course of a pay period, and it just didn't feel right. He was annoyed by the principle, and after several days of deliberation he turned down the job and handed in his notice. He is now happily working part-time at another city centre venue where he finishes by midnight at the latest and can therefore get home by public transport, avoiding the costly necessity of travelling by taxi after a 4 a.m. finish. My son's new employer has been faultlessly flexible in working around his university schedule, and on top of all of that, his hourly rate is more than it would have been as a line manager at his previous place of work. I tell this story because it illustrates one of the many issues that the incoming Labour government has pledged to swiftly reform under its New Deal for Working People. Sir Keir Starmer's party has promised to introduce legislation within the first 100 days in government, meaning we should expect to see a draft employment rights bill as early as mid-October. The raft of changes that have been put forward, collectively billed by Labour as the biggest upgrade to rights at work in a generation, include a commitment to remove the age bands within the adult rates that apply to the minimum wage. Not all employers rely on these lower pay rates for young adults to keep a handle on wage bills that have surged in recent years in an attempt to keep up with inflation, but there are significant numbers that do. This is particularly true in sectors such as retail and hospitality, which have struggled to regain their footing in the wake of COVID lockdown restrictions. How they will cope remains to be seen, and it's a similar story when it comes to the impact of a major impending shift on the use of zero-hour contracts that have been blamed for undermining workers' security and undercutting wages. There are now approximately 100,000 people in Scotland working on 0 hours contracts, under which employers are not obliged to provide any minimum number of working hours to staff. That number has surged by 42% since 2019, the year immediately prior to the pandemic. Trade unions have said nothing will suffice other than a total ban on such working arrangements. But in the wake of consultations with business leaders, Labour has slightly watered down its position by acknowledging that opportunities to work flexibly do benefit some workers, and it seems they may be allowed to retain 0 hours status. The plan is to outlaw what are referred to as exploitative 0 hours arrangements by granting the right to have a contract that reflects the number of hours regularly worked based on a 12-week reference period. However, it remains unclear how this might pan out in the case of industries with natural seasonal peaks such as tourism during the summers and retailers in the run-up to Christmas. To offer some comfort to organisations in sectors such as these, Labour's Make Work Pay proposals specifically mention that employers would not be prevented from offering fixed-term contracts, including seasonal work. This is a reasonable stance and should address most, if not all, concerns among reputable organisations on this point. The detestable practice of fire and rehire is also set for the chopping block, and while its use is not as widespread as noisy headlines might suggest, there is no place for this method of business management in an equitable modern economy. One of the biggest proposals, with arguably the widest ranging impact, is the introduction of Day One rights, which will grant employees protection from unfair dismissal, parental leave, and sick pay entitlement from their first day on the job. Coupled with this is the proposal to remove the confusing legal distinction between an employee, someone hired for a specific job, and a worker who has a less structured relationship with their employer. Employees typically have more rights than workers, such as freelance contractors. So merging these two into a single category, while also extending Day One rights, would have a seismic impact on the employment landscape. Here again, however, there is a lack of clarity. It could very well be that Day One rights are quickly introduced for those currently classed as employees, while the conflation of employees and workers is subject to a lengthier consultation process. But even if the removal of qualifying periods is limited initially to employees, this would still be a big change. As things currently stand, most staff must have 2 years of service before they can claim unfair dismissal, a right that is oddly bestowed far beyond the usual probationary period. Although it won't directly affect him, my son is unsurprisingly upbeat about the idea of removing discriminatory minimum wage bans and other labour law reforms. There is no doubt that the scales between employers and staff need rebalancing, but there is a real danger of unintended consequences when undertaking such a massive overhaul in a short space of time. That article was by Christy Dorsey. This is from the Herald Scotland of Tuesday the 9th of July 2024 from the business section. Plan for student flats at site earmarked for housing. This article is by Brian Donnelly. Plans for student housing on a site previously earmarked for housing have been brought forward. Part of the site that has consent for nearly 100 new homes would instead be used for flats for 80 students under the new plans. Plans put forward by Scott Hobbs Planning with 56.3 architects on behalf of J. Smart and Company are now for purpose-built student accommodation development at 117 to 135 Pitt Street, Edinburgh. This application site formed a part of the wider site that was consented, the application reveals, for 2 flatted blocks of residential development comprising 98 flats with 25% affordable housing. The application site to which this consent relates is in 2 separate ownerships, and it is no longer the intention to develop the site in partnership. Instead, 2 planning applications are being submitted for the southern portion of the site, and once approved, these will be implemented separately by the individual landowner. The residential development consented on the northern portion of the original site fronting Trafalgar Lane will be implemented separately in accordance with the extant planning permission. The statement added, the current application site comprises the southwest portion of the wider site in the ownership of J. Smart and Company, while the southeast part of the site is subject to a separate planning application under separate ownership. The planning permission for the flatted development on the northern portion of the site will be implemented in accordance with the extant planning permission. The proposed PBSA scheme does not preclude the development of the northern consented residential scheme, and it enables the provision for drainage and other services that are consented through the extant planning permission. That article was by Brian Donnelly. This is from the Herald Scotland of Tuesday the 9th of July 2024 from the business section. Retail sales falter as Scots shun shopping for major events. This article is by Christy Dorsey. Scottish shoppers cut back on spending across virtually all retail categories in June, despite a slight increase in footfall generated by a number of high-profile events. Total sales were down 3.4% compared to a year earlier and were 2.9% lower on a like-for-like basis, according to the latest monthly monitor produced by the Scottish Retail Consortium, the SRC, and accountancy group KPMG. Total food sales were 1.1% lower, and non-food sales fell by 4.8%. The fall in like-for-like spending, which strips out the impact of new shop openings, represented a deterioration on the 3-month average decrease of 2.1%. It was also substantially below the 12-month average growth trend of 1.6%. Ewan MacDonald-Russell, deputy head of the SRC, said the downturn was triggered by a combination of unseasonably cold weather, which hampered clothing sales, plus the impact of Scots travelling to events such as concerts and the Euro 2024 competition in Germany. Linda Ellett, head of retail at KPMG, added that consumers remain incredibly reluctant to take the brakes off their spending despite easing pressure on household finances. Retailers who are running to stand still at the moment, having exhausted all of the levers they have at their disposal to cut costs and drive sales via promotions, will be looking to the new government to boost the economy and confidence, she said. The overall economic conditions may slowly be improving, but the health of the sector remains fragile, and action is needed now to help support this vital economic contributor, particularly around neglected areas such as business rate reform. Separate figures released last week by the SRC showed Scotland to be the best of a bad UK bunch for shopper footfall last month, with numbers up by a modest 0.2% amid Taylor Swift's Eras tour stop in Edinburgh, and a boost from sports fans going out to watch the Euros. However, this failed to translate into increased spending. Food sales fell back across the month, possibly a sign consumers have a little more financial headroom after a year of responding to food price inflation, Mr. MacDonald Russell said. However, there was little evidence of a switch to high street spending, with summer clothing and footwear ranges particularly struggling. There was a small uplift in technology sales, a combination of sports fans acquiring new televisions for the Euros and consumers replacing pandemic purchases. That article was by Christy Dorsey.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Tune Review and to tell your friends about our service.